Welcome to my channel. I'm Gary Wiryawan and today we're going to talk about this lens right here, the Laowa 7.5mm f2. Let's go! So today we are going to talk about this lens right here, the Laowa 7.5mm f2. This is a long-term review of this lens because I've been using this lens since 2017. However, this last few months I've been using this lens even more frequent for my everyday photography challenge. I made a review about this lens many years ago and I featured this lens a few times on my other videos as well, and you can check out that old review right here. But today I want to revisit this lens again and add my new observations based on my recent experience with the Laowa 7.5mm f2 lens. First, let's talk about the basic specification of the Laowa 7.5mm f2 lens. So basically, this lens is a prime manual focus only lens for micro four thirds camera with a focal length of 7.5mm and a large aperture of f2, which I really love, by the way. The field of view of this lens, which is 7.5mm or about 15mm in full frame terms, is excellent for that dramatic ultra wide angle shots, especially for landscape photography and also for some other kind of photography genres as well. Now, the most interesting thing about this lens is the large aperture of f2, which is not that common for ultra wide angle lens, especially for the one that is this size. So yeah, good job Laowa. This is really a nice lens and I really love the large aperture of f2. With the large aperture of f2, you can get the ability to shoot in lower light situation. You don't have to crank up your ISO too high, which is important especially for micro four thirds camera, and you can also get a little bit of background blur, not that much because this is an ultra wide angle lens, but it is still helpful for some situations. Another interesting thing about this lens is it's all manual. There's no autofocus, there's no in-body stabilizer. You have to focus manually using the manual focus ring right here, and also you have to select your aperture manually using the aperture ring down here. Another thing that will grab your attention when you're first handling this lens is the fact that it is so small and also it is lightweight. It is not that much bigger compared to the Olympus 45mm f1.8 lens, and also it is not that heavy. It is about 170 grams, which is not that bad, but you can still feel a little bit of heft on your hand when you're handling this lens. Build quality of this lens is quite nice. As you can hear, it is quite solid, it feels very robust, there's no loose parts or anything, it's just pretty solid. There's no weather sealing on this lens, so you have to be careful when you're shooting in a bad weather or in the rain. Another interesting feature of this lens is that it has a 46mm filter thread. So if you're using circular polarizer or if you're using ND filters, you can use it with this lens. I think using filters with wide angle lens is very important, especially if you're doing landscape photography. If you want to get that long exposure, if you want to cut a little bit of glare using the circular polarizer, you can do it with this lens. All in all, I can say that this lens is another perfect embodiment of the original Micro Four Thirds philosophy. It is small, it is lightweight, but it produces nice image quality and also it is relatively affordable. That is the original Micro Four Thirds philosophy, and I'm always a big fan of something like this. Now let's talk about the usage of this lens. I mainly use this lens to capture sceneries that require wide angle focal length and that will benefit from something really wide like this, especially for landscape photographs. Now with a focal length so wide like the 7.5mm, you'll be able to get drama in your picture. You'll be able to push things that are far away and pull things closer that are closer to you. So foregrounds will look bigger and backgrounds will look smaller, and that is very nice sometimes when you know how to apply this kind of drama into your picture. However, that means that you have to be really mindful when you are composing your image. You have to make sure that there's a foreground of interest that doesn't really overpower your whole image, and you have to frame the background and the midground carefully because any little bit of misalignments and miss of balance will be more pronounced when you're using wide angle lens. With the large aperture of f2, I was able to also use this lens for landscape photography at lower light situation and even for astrophotography. When I went to Iceland last year, I was able to use this lens to capture a really weak northern light, and although the northern light doesn't really look that interesting or fantastic, I can still capture it with this lens nevertheless. Another favorite usage of the Laowa lens is for environmental portrait. I love to capture wide angle portrait using this lens because it gives that unique dramatic look that you don't really get with a normal angle lens, especially for environmental portrait. However, you have to be really careful when using this lens for environmental portrait. Once again, as I said, you have to make sure that everything is balanced. You have to make sure also that the horizontal lines and the vertical lines are also properly lined up, and also you have to put your subject right in the center, not on the sides, and also you have to keep a safe distance. Otherwise, distortion, especially perspective distortion, will be a real problem when using wide angle lens, and you'll end up with misaligned pictures that look really weird with some kind of pronunciation that you don't really like, and you have to be really careful with this kind of things. Now, still in the topic of usage, I want to talk about the focus situation with this lens. As you know, this lens only has manual focus, there's no autofocus, and some people think that the absence of autofocus on this lens will be a problem. However, I can say that actually manual focus using wide angle lens such as the Laowa 7.5mm is not really that difficult. You can just focus at hyperfocal distance and forget about focus. So on this lens right here, I mark my hyperfocal distance at the focus ring somewhere right here, and I basically just need to focus in that area right there on the marker that I put right here, and I'll be able to make sure that everything from 3 meters away up until infinity will always be in focus. However, on some occasions where you cannot really use hyperfocal distance, such as when you're doing environmental portrait or close-up photography, you just have to manually focus the focus ring until you get it perfectly sharp. You will need to use some features that's available on your camera, such as being able to punch in and zoom clearly into the area of focus that you want, and being able to nail the focus perfectly. And also you'll need to rely on some other features such as focus picking and some other manual focus guide. Now let's talk about image quality when using Laowa 7.5mm f2. And right away, I can say that image quality is fantastic when you're using this lens. Everything related to the image quality of this lens, such as sharpness, color, and contrast, they are all really nice. So I can really depend on this lens when it comes to critical image quality. You don't even have to stop down the lens from f2 to f2.8 or f4 to get the optimum sharpness of this lens. It'll already be sharp even at f2. However, you need to be mindful about some potential vignetting, because this is such an ultra wide angle lens and there's always a little bit of vignetting presence even if you stop it down to f4 or f5.6. So yes, overall the Laowa 7.5mm f2 is really a solid lens. If you are a micro four thirds shooter and you need an ultra wide angle lens, it can really produce fantastic image quality, and also it is very dependable. The build quality is solid. However, there are two negative things that I think you really should know about, and maybe you already know what are those two things, but basically the first negative thing is that there is no autofocus with this lens. And although, as I said previously, manual focus isn't really an issue, I still sometimes wish for an autofocus on this lens, because it will be really helpful for those situations where you cannot really rely on hyperfocal distance. And also, I missed a few shots because of the manual focus ring getting knocked when I'm trying to adjust the camera and such, and that is really a bummer. And the second negative thing is the vignetting, as I mentioned before. Even if you stop it down to f4 or f5.6, the vignette will still be there, although it is not as strong as if it's in f2. So yeah, vignetting is a little bit of a problem. However, it is really easy to correct if you're using post-processing software. It is not really difficult to correct for the vignettes, and you can get a nice clean image without all those imperfections from the vignetting. So now I want to talk about some alternative lenses to the Laowa 7.5mm f2. If you're considering the Laowa lens, I think you should also check out these other lenses as well. First alternative is the Panasonic Leica 8 to 18mm f2.8 to f4, this guy right here. This is my favorite ultra wide angle lens besides the Laowa 7.5mm f2. This lens is actually quite more flexible when compared to the Laowa lens because this is a zoom lens. It can go down to 8mm, which is not that different from 7.5mm. However, it can zoom into 18mm, which makes it really versatile and flexible, perfect for travel photography and landscape photography. The aperture is f2.8, not as large as f2, but it is still large enough for most of your needs as well. It is also weather sealed, and more importantly, it comes with auto focus, which the Laowa lens doesn't have. However, the Panasonic Leica 8 to 18mm is larger, it's bulkier, it's heavier. So a little bit of trade-off in size and weight, but you get a little bit more flexibility when compared to the Laowa lens. Another nice alternative to the Laowa 7.5mm f2 is the Panasonic Leica 9mm f1.7. I think it is a really great lens. I don't personally own that lens, but it is very similar to the Laowa 7.5mm. It has 9mm focal length, slightly tighter than the 7.5mm focal length of the Laowa lens right here. But it also has large aperture of f1.7, which is slightly larger than f2 of this lens right here. And more importantly, it has autofocus, which the Laowa lens doesn't have. However, I personally still prefer the Laowa lens because 7.5mm, which is wider than 9mm, I think is more useful. If I need something tighter, I can just crop the picture a little bit using Adobe Lightroom or something like that, and that makes the Laowa lens a little bit more useful in that regard. There's also the Panasonic Lumix 7 to 14mm f4, which I used to own, and I also think that it is a great wide angle lens. It is slightly more flexible compared to the Laowa lens because it can go to 14mm, which is very flexible if you don't really need that ultra wide angle focal length all the time. However, the aperture can only go to f4, which is not really that large enough, although it is more than good enough for most of my needs. And also there's no filter thread on that lens, so I cannot really attach any circular polarizer filter or ND filter or any kind of filters at all using that lens. So yeah, I still much prefer the Laowa lens. An honorable mention goes to the Olympus 9 to 18mm, this lens right here. I think this is an almost perfect alternative to the Laowa 7.5mm f2 if you don't really need that large aperture, because this lens is so small, it's so lightweight, it's so versatile because it has a zoom range from 9mm, which is still relatively wide angle, all the way to 18mm, which is quite a lot tighter. So this is perfect for travel photography if you need something small and lightweight for your travel. However, I experienced a ribbon cable issue, which makes this lens unable to autofocus at 14 to 18mm, which makes this lens basically unusable. So I no longer recommend this lens as an alternative to the Laowa lens. So yeah, after using the Laowa lens for many years and also after using it intensely these last few months for my everyday photography challenge, I can say that I am really happy with the Laowa lens. I'm really happy with the image quality. I'm quite happy with its performance, with how it really complements my other lenses when I'm doing everyday photography. It is such a really nice lens to use if you need something small and something really quick that you can quickly attach to your camera and start taking wide angle pictures. I think this lens is just really nice. The large aperture of f2 is really useful for lower light situation, and also the 7.5mm focal length, I think it is quite wide enough for most of my wide angle needs. And that really wraps up today's video. So that is all for today's video. I hope that this video is useful and informative to you. So please comment down below what is your favorite wide angle lens. Also, if you have any question about this video, you can comment down below and I will try to answer them as well. And also don't forget to support my channel by liking this video, sharing this video and subscribing to my channel down below. Thank you and goodbye.